Cleopatra was white and on hentai. There's been a lot of videos this week talking about Netflix making Cleopatra black, right, in their own history and documentary. But what no one has addressed so far, and I guess I have to be the guy then, is that it's also a complete hentai and not a role model in any way, shape, or form. So it's very quickly say here, she, YouTube friendly here, she married her brother, had, intercourse with her brothers, probably with her own mom as well, killed her own mother, probably, killed her own brothers, definitely, used her vagina later on, right, to, sleep with cis and so on, and killing them and so on, and putting together. She's a colonizer, she had a slave trade and so on. So I'm just like, even if she is black, right, even if we assume that she was black, which of course she wasn't, but assuming she was black, I find it funny that I've seen many videos now, especially Netflix, right, but no one's addressing that. Why do these, honestly, right, black Americans, like of course Jade Smith's wife, right, Jada Pinkett Smith, why do they want to make her this like role model of like black people or something? Egyptians weren't black at all, for that matter, right? But even if they were, she was like a complete perverted hentai woman that slept with everyone and then backstabbed them all, literally. So I want to see this video here. If you subscribe, press the like button, right? Because I feel no one talking about how Cleopatra is arguably one of the worst, most like perverted queens we've ever had in history that survived for a few years, right? And obviously her whole family, though, was just completely incestuous. So it is. I think it's so funny too. It's like, okay, but why do you want to make her black for? She's not like a good role model. Really not. Before that, let me address something very briefly. So my grandpa was a historical professor and a math professor, and my grandma was a language. She focused on language. So I grew up with my grandparents for a lot of time, right? And I'm European, right? I think a lot of Europeans are very into the antique, right? The Roman and Greek and so on. So I grew up with my grandpa, which was on his expertise was specifically this thing then, Egyptian, Greek, Roman, and so on, and also kind of like the League Wars, the 30-year war with like the Catholic, and that's kind of his two areas of the hardcore expertise, right? And growing up there with my professor grandpa, he would teach me math and history like all the time, like, every day. So I basically had like a private lecture at home, and my grandma taught me like French and so on. Like 5, I could speak French and so on, right? And my grandpa was like, okay, this is Euler, this is this thing, this is Cleopatra. So when I got to school as a 6-year-old, I was already in like college math so on, right? When I was like 6 or so on. But anyway, so I really know this thing. Like I really know. I really know everything this to know. I feel about antique history. So anyway, let's first look at this Netflix trailer, right? So of course it's made by Will Smith's wife that we commented later slept with her son's friends and so on. She's a hentai character, right? But okay, so they make a bit of black. Queens. You can see here, right? And Mother of Nations and so on. But the thing is that she's kind of so I guess they have this idea, right? The Cleopatra is an iconic queen or something, and that is partially true. But she's not iconic for being a good queen. That's kind of the thing, She's not iconic because she was like a amazing strategist or whatever. She, first of all, I think it's very important to think about here, historical aspect. She was born into the power, right? She wasn't a natural good leader or anything. She was literally born into the power. She's the Cleopatra the 7th, right? It's one thing people very usually misunderstand, right? She actually is Cleopatra the 7th. And she wasn't actually supposed to be the leader. So I have, of course, the image of what he must cute. She actually was supposed, her brother was actually supposed to be the leader, right? So she was married to her brother, which she had, which she had YouTube fun with, right? So she was smacking her brother, right, around and so on. And then she literally betrayed her brother. So she killed her own brother so she could be in control. And it wasn't really like she was, against the whole incest, but it was more like she wanted to be in power, right? So she betrayed the actual leader to gain the power. And you could argue, of course, that made her successful and so on. And of course it did. But I think it's a very weird thing, honestly. And I really mean it here, right? All jokes aside, I think it's very strange having this focus on like people today want to be, she's like a black empowered woman. To me, this isn't a black empowered woman, even if she was black, right? I said here, in this video, I want to address why Cleopatra isn't a good role model and then talk about why she isn't black, right? But, for example, Oprah Winfrey. I grew up as a kid, right? My mom loved Oprah, watched it every day, so I seen a lot of Oprah, you know what I mean? And Oprah Winfrey for me, that's like an empowered black woman. It's like she starts poor and she works her way up, right, to become rich and famous and and so on, right? And she has her own companies, she runs them fairly well and so on. That to me is like a successful black woman story, right? And I mean it, right? Where Cleopatra to me isn't really a successful, women empowering story. She's born into wealth, right? Again, monarchy, in a slave colony, basically. That's commented later, but basically, conquered land, right, from other people. And then she kills all her family members after smashing them, after having sex with everyone. She kills them all, right, in different ways. And that, I guess, supposedly is somewhat sexual, though, to be fair. But still, it's like she wasn't even supposed to be the ruler. She's killed everyone else. I mean, honestly, if anything Cleopatra, I would say, is famous for, is for being a manipulative, betrayer. Yeah, she's the Judas of Egyptian lineage. You know what I mean? She's basically the Judas, right? She's like the worst person they ever had, basically. And in that sense, again, she's empowering because she really did kill basically everyone, and she basically, used all her such skills, right, to trick the Romans and all this stuff. So she was quite successful, to be fair, right, as then again betraying bitch, right? But honestly, is that empowering? Is that a role model for like young? Because if you ask these people doing this documentary, right, they're gonna claim that, oh, but we need to have black role models, empowered women and so on. But do you actually want to raise your daughter today and telling her that, okay, sleep with your family members and then kill them in the bedroom? Is that what you want to tell your family members? There's a reason I put on my Kill la Kill shirt, right? Because Cleopatra had very likely, not only she married her own brother, right, and had intercourse with her brother, she also probably with her own mom, right? And also to her mom, which is Cleopatra the 6th or the 5th, then, depending on the sources, she wanted to kill Cleopatra to marry her own son, okay? So Cleopatra killed her own brother, her mother's son, before her mom could kill her or marry her brother. She could marry the other brother, and so on. So Cleopatra is a crazy evil. If anything Cleopatra is famous for is being used like pure evil. She slept with everyone in her family, and then she killed them all in different betrayal and poison. That's basically it, if I summarize quickly, right? Furthermore, then she used all her powers, right, to seduce different Roman guys, right? Sleep with them and so on. So her whole power is seductive, evil, Judas backtrayer. Right? However, put out there, she lost, right? She tried to make the Romans fight each other, and that failed. So what did she actually accomplish? She killed her whole family, destroyed her own lineage, you know what I mean? Got a son with this general and so on, the Romans. That was the wrong pick, right? She basically picked the wrong horse in the Roman Civil War, more or less, right? So on. And then she died. You know what I mean? And they lost, and Egypt became a Roman province, right? So she did nothing successful, like straight up. The only thing she was good at was like killing all her own family members so she could remain in power for a short duration, right? And then, of course, she then got killed by the Romans, basically, or enslaved by the Romans, right? So I can't see how anyone would even find her like a successful female leader. And again, she was born into the power. She didn't gain the power by, being a good leader and having good ideas. She was born into the power and then killed the actual rightful people that should have been in power, like her brother. She killed him after seducing him. She killed him. I mean, explain this thing is so crazy. And you also can't forget, right, talking about the whole, the black power movement and so on, is that if you go back in history here, right, the reason she wasn't Egyptian is because the Greek, with Alexander the Great, had conquered, of course, large part of the current, world in that sense, right? And one of his generals then took over, Egypt and the areas around that, and then, that became the political, her lineage, right? And what happened basically was that they are Greek people that are enslaving, in the sense of colonizing, Egypt, right? So her whole family was basically like slave owners. They were the upper super elite, right? And all the Egyptians were their slaves. And her father and so on couldn't even speak Egyptian, right? So that to me is so fascinating, honestly, because why are these like black people in America trying to make her be Egyptian and so on? No, her family was basically a collection of slave owners, right, that had enslaved the Egyptians, which weren't black for that matter, but let's say for argument that they were black then. Whatever, you know what I mean? Yeah, is that a good thing? Yeah, no, that's a bad thing too, right? Like, no, they enslaved them. I think this is probably the best part of the whole Netflix documentary. And I know I'm not the first person to say it, because a lot of other people heard them mention this part, right? But there's this black woman that's like, my grandmother said that if you believe she's black, she's black. That's not how reality works, right? Like, it is quite sad, and I think this is dangerous, you know. This is why I kind of want to make more of these kind of videos, so please subscribe, slap something if you like the video, right, and leave a comment below. I think this is dangerous, honestly. I've seen this pattern for a long time now, especially for stuff from Sweden. I've seen this kind of ideology pattern, but to me this is like straight up dangerous, right, honestly. Having people telling you that, well, if you want her to be black, she's black, okay, I want this guy to be white then, you know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense, right? You can't just tell anyone that, oh, because I want them to be this color or this race or whatever, or this gender, they are that. No, that this is historical facts exist, right? So let's go into a little bit why she's white then, right? And she definitely isn't black. First of all, as I mentioned, right, her lineage comes from the conquest then, right, of Egypt by the Greeks, right? So now they have that thing. So the Greeks taking over Egypt. We don't have to go into the whole, this father and her blah 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 and so on, but the general idea is that you have a ruling class, right, of Greek people, right? They're all white, right? Okay. As already been over, Cleopatra famously, you know, was incestuous married, right? She married her brother, probably smashed her own mom, you know, all that stuff, right? She was probably very, very, you know, it's all perverted and crazy, right? The actual Egyptian lineage. And the pharaohs, even before her, I mean, not her family line, but the earlier, you know, pharaohs and so on, were also very famous for all the, you know, inbreeding, right? So it's very, very iconic that the Egyptian culture, the leaders, have, you know, kids with their siblings or whatever, or their own mom and so on. There are many, except that Tutankhamun, right, had inbreeding issues and so on. There are many cases of this thing, right? So that's a very, very iconic thing. So not only was she then, you know, white and or olive skin perhaps, but this is white, right? Greek white. Furthermore, the whole concept that she would have slept with, or not she perhaps, but her father, I guess, right? Some people are arguing that maybe her mom was black, right, or her grandma was black. Doesn't make any sense. These people, not only wouldn't they not sleep with commoners, they only slept inside her family. Think about that. That's why it doesn't make any sense to at all claim that she could have been like half black or something, because at best, right, she would have been like half Greek and half black or something at best. But no, this family was so iconically basically only marrying inside their own family that it is extremely unlikely. Like it's basically impossible, right? It's impossible. We have seen this art of her. There are books about her written by that time. We have, you know, literal art and so on of her face, so we know that she isn't black anyway. But even if we didn't have this art, right, even if we didn't have the actual description and so on of Cleopatra and her family, she clearly is white. But even if we didn't have that, we could still assume that Occam's razor, right, basic logical understanding of the world, is that but her parents were siblings, right, and she was married to her sibling, right, and her mom wanted to kill her and marry her own son, her sibling, so I mean, sibling, and so on, right? So that's how that family had been doing it for a few hundred years. So there's no way that they would have any, you know, other genes in it. And looking at this thing, right, again, I want to come back and stress this point, right? I understand how people, then mostly in African Americans, I guess, right, in the West, it's like, oh no, she was black because poor. Why? She was a racist. Do you understand it? Cleopatra hated black people. Don't understand it. She was a complete racist. Her whole family would never sleep with a black person. But they hated black people, right? Am I the only one see this thing? Like, I'm just like, am I thinking crazy piece? I'm just like, Cleopatra was racist, you know. Like, honestly, right? Cleopatra obviously was. Her family, they were so into their own family that they barely would even marry people that were other whites. You know what I mean? Her family was so anti whatever else exists, right, that she wasn't even allowed to marry a white person, let alone a black person. Like, understand how crazy racist her actual family was, or her culture was, right? The lineage of, divine blood or whatever, right? That's kind of how you control people back in the days, right? You will tell them that, oh yeah, but I'm the son of Zeus, something, you know what I mean? And there is no way in hell that her ancestors in their lineage, so to speak, could have married like a black woman or a black man or whatever. Like it never would have happened. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Like I said, they would basically only marry each other, right? So they wouldn't even marry other white people outside their own family. Just because you live in Africa, it would have to be black. I think that's one thing I have to address here too, right? The fact is that Africa is a very big continent, and Northern Africa was mostly not black people, right? At best, right, at this time frame, they were Arabic, you know what I mean? They weren't really Arabic, they were like a mixture of, like white European, little black. In Nubia, Upper Egypt is black, or was black, at least partially, and Middle Eastern, right? So that's something that's so weird too. For example, the Ottoman Empire, the Mamelukes, all the different nations that has been in North Africa, right? They weren't black. So more basically, if you summarize it very quickly, right? Northern Africa, most of history, Northern Africa, black people haven't lived there, right? Well, I mean, sure, maybe some black people have been there anyway, but not like as a ruling class or as in power or something. And I just wanna not dwell on it too much, but I find it kind of weird that always like, I think a lot of people in the kind of modern, I guess, politically left, I suppose, but still mostly, regardless of that even, a lot of people in America is like, well, if you're from Africa, to be black, right? It's like, no, not if you're from Northern Africa. I said the Romans actually conquered Egypt, right? This woman here is claiming that Cleopatra was exercising power, but she wasn't. She lost, and, Egypt became like a province in Rome, right? Because the Roman Empire famously controlled every country, right, around the Mediterranean. And they were very white, right? So, no, she didn't really have much power. She literally slept her way around the power, right, with Romans, picked the wrong horse, as I mentioned, lost the power, and eventually, the Romans conquered them. And for the people, though, they were Egyptians, not much big of a difference, right? Because they were ruled by a ruling class of white people, right, from Greek, and then the Romans killed those people, basically, and became the new ruling white class of Egyptians, basically, right? So it wasn't much of it wasn't actually that bad, honestly, and that bad. But I mean, if you were a random Egyptian, working on your farm, and when the Cleopatra was whatever, usurped and she was removed, and now you got this other Roman guy instead, who's white, you're like whatever. Like it didn't matter that much. The Romans didn't like enforce much more taxation or whatever. So like it's kind of the same thing. I mean, honestly, it's kind of funny, I think, from a historical aspect. But a lot of times, people imagine that, oh no, a lot of people today, I mean, imagine that if you kill the leader, the ruler, or whatever, right? Now everyone's gonna rebel or whatever. But in actuality, right? A lot of times where someone was like, oh, they killed the king or the queen or whatever, and now this guy's the new king, does it matter for me? No, it doesn't. For most people, right, it actually was like, okay, does the new king have higher taxation for me? No. Does he have a bigger army? Yes, the Romans have a much bigger army. Okay, maybe this is better for me then. Because actually the Romans, right, one thing that people, I think, miss out with the Romans is that a lot of countries joined the Roman Empire voluntarily, on purpose, what they call it. Voluntarily, I guess, better word for it. So basically, some of the province, around Rome and Rome, grow and so on, they wanted to join Roman Empire. They were like, oh yeah, we can join you guys, we can pay taxes and so on, right? And you have your massive army, right? The Roman army was, legendary, super awesome and so on, right? And they had better technology, they had the ballista and so on. So, can we join you guys? They're like, yeah, if you join, you have to pay tax and do this stuff, right? But as long as you pay that stuff, you can join. So the Roman actually gained a lot of countries by they used like, we want to be a Roman nation because it's better. You have a much bigger army, right? You can defend us against whatever the barbarians over there, right? And you have better tech, you have better healthcare. So they actually wanted to join them, right? So I think, I might be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure on this thing. When Cleopatra lost the control over Egypt, which she of course unrightfully stole by killing her family members, when she lost that, I would argue that it actually was better for the peasants. You know what I mean? Maybe I'm wrong here, but I would argue, my grandpa probably gave me here, he was here with me, my grandpa, that I mentioned being in videos, an expert on this part. He would argue, and this is of course my childhood, but still, he would argue that it basically was better for the commoners when the Romans took over. It wasn't even a negative thing. I think it's important to point out here that when Cleopatra lost the power of Egypt, and when her, Greek family lineage, so to speak, lost the power of Egypt, it actually was an improvement of life for most Egyptians. More or less, but the Romans took it over. They weren't like terrible to the people. They really weren't. Romans usually was the Roman success, and why the Roman could be for such a long empire, right? Was because they took over a country, and they just kind of like, okay, this is tax money. Here's our stuff. We're gonna build that, blah blah blah. And the Roman actually made it better because they were like, okay, let's build a house over here. Aqueduct over there, Vita over there, here's a bat, They actually kind of went in and like, the Romans were very good engineers mostly, right? They were very good with bureaucracy engineering. So they would take over a country and they basically made it better, right? And again, the Egyptians at that time were basically a slave class to Cleopatra's white Greek class, right? So when they were usurped, here goes another white class in, and this white class is actually like, we have better ideas how to improve your, your land or whatever, how to make a better engineering and so on, how to make a better mill and so on. The people were like, okay, people didn't have to pay more tax really, and they had better technology, so they were like, oh, I guess our life is better now. And also the Romans had a much bigger army, right? So other countries wouldn't attack the Egyptians anymore because they had to fight the Romans. So she kind of lost, and the Romans took over Egypt, right? And it basically was kind of like not much blood, she lost, and the people kind of joined them more or less voluntarily. They were like, okay, well, let's join the Romans. It's way better than she was. So in the end, it was like she was a terrible leader in so many ways. And I think it's important to think about that the Romans basically took over Egypt, and that improved the life of the Egyptians. I would argue for. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that most historical thing points to that the people, the commoners, so to speak, the Egyptians, right, actually preferred being part of the Roman Empire. And this with a joke, though, I suppose. I think it's kind of funny, though, that when I'm thinking about, who is actually for this thing? Who claims that Cleopatra is a role model? Well, it's Jada Pinkett Smith, the woman that slept with her son's best friend or whatever, right? Yeah, the MILF that is going after, very, maybe even, too young, so to speak, Maybe even YouTube too young people to sleep with. So maybe that's what she likes Cleopatra. She's like, oh, well, Cleopatra, she fucked everyone. That's pretty cool. Anyway, please subscribe, press the like button, and have a great day.